Stories or not stories? Okay, you know today is Friday 13th. Why am I not here? Hello, I'm supposed to be in the screen, but I'm not in the screen. Well, never mind it. I can, what is it? Okay, whatever. Never mind, because this is mostly about. Hello, welcome. We were waiting for you. So happy to see you here. Do we have chair for you? Just one chair here. You have the honor seat. Right, so let me go to the photos. And since we are recording, okay, so we are here. I did not create a proper PowerPoint, so I will have to show things just by fragments. First thing is this week book. Actually, it's part of one set of books. Let's try to have this. Okay, let's never mind it. What is this? So we commented about the history of architecture in the 20th century, 19th, 20th century. It is in big part a German invention. Right? It comes all from the German philosophies. Kant was the first aesthetic theory in modern philosophy. Then we have Hegel, which is considered a continuation of Kant. Curiously, Kant wrote a lot about aesthetics, but he was not at all fond on art. He didn't like it. But Hegel was very much a lover of art. So he visited all museums he could. He went to all performances. So he was very well versed about it, right? Hegel is called about the idealism, right? The problem is we have an interesting guy, same time as Hegel. I commented that Schopenhauer, which is categorized as the pessimist. And he is a case unique in philosophy because he was totally against Hegel. Actually, he would teach at the same university. He was convinced his philosophy would win all the students, but after one semester, he gave up because nobody came to his class. Hegel had like 200 people always, right? That was in the early 1800s, right? The interesting thing is why this. He would say that actually he has his annotations in Hegel book, and he was saying this donkey. He would write a donkey and say this guy is an ignorant. He just speaks difficult to hide his ignorance. It was like really aggressive. We don't know anybody else in the world of philosophy who was so aggressive and so anti. But the interesting point, apart from this kind of anecdote, is that he was very much trying to make a philosophy in a way that people understand. So he was against all that hermetism, that complication of Hegel, which really you have to study hard and understand things, right? It's very complex. And explain things from the perspective of the plain human. His ideas are very simple, but as we commented, to explain simple things, you need a lot of explanations. His first book, the masterpiece, The World as Representation and Will, or Volunty, it's like 700 pages. And the second part is 700 pages. And a later book he wrote for just like a casual philosophy and essays, which is one of them is the most popular now. It's about the meditation, contemplation, all those things, which still is very sold. It was 1,000 pages, right? And he would say you have to read all his books word by word to understand things, which is a bit. So why pessimist? He had a hard life in some point, and he was quite pessimistic actually about humanity. People are selfish, are terrible, you have to survive. Life is suffering. He was very much into the Buddhist philosophy. Actually, he's one of the few ones who really try to connect Eastern and Western philosophy. He would make like Buddhist prayers, because he would have a Buddha statue in his house, put in a way that the sun would reflect and would be seen from the church, just to nag the priest because he was anti-clerical, right? So he said the world is suffering and life is life is harsh, which is quite Buddhist, right? And people would think that, well, that would mean like we have to suicide. So that's, again, silly thing to do. Life is harsh, but it's what we have. And we have to find the ways to soften that harshness and to endure and to enjoy life as we can. And one of those ways to soften things are art, right? It's a reading, literature, music with harmonies and silences. It is interesting that he summarizes as harmony and silence, right? This kind of opposite, which is so very Oriental. And he had a huge influence in, at the end of his life, in the 1840s, 50s, the world was changing. Europe has much more revolutions. It was a harsher environment. People forgot a bit about Hegel, those idealists, and thought it was much more everyday, real philosophy. So he became quite popular. And Schopenhauer was a big influence in book art, which is like the father of German history of architecture and art, right? I didn't read his books, but they started basically like the medieval and the Renaissance, which is what in Europe was always this kind of a dilemma between that classic inheritance and that very original, unique Gothic architecture. His student was Böflin. Böflin succeeded him in the seat of the university. And of course, he would try to elaborate better than Burckhardt, be more scientific. We're speaking of the 1914, I think it's his first book, Renaissance and Baroque. I have the Spanish version. That was the time we said theory of relativity, psychology, that kind of perceptual psychology. We had Freud, right? So Böflin tried to understand architecture based on the perception we have, which was a little bit close to the Schopenhauer, which was also much more about phenomenological understanding the world, which is why this says the world is representation and will of doing things. And this is quite influential book. He has this, then he later wrote Principles in the Architecture of Humanism, I think, or Art History, I'm not sure. Then Paul Frank would be the student, not so famous, but he did a full study. Well, he did many studies. But again, essential principles in the history of architecture, they were trying to find the essence. What is interesting is they are all not just making labels, but understanding how architecture was connected with the life, the history, with the ideas, and how those changes took place in history, not making one style or one period superior than others, but it's kind of logical part of the expression of the human movement through history, right? Then Wolflim, Frank were teaching a long time. Many of his students are famous historians. We have and many German. We have Siegfried Gideon, right? We have Nikolaus Pevsner. Gideon would go to the States and would be part of the international movement. Friend of Gropius, make like the history of this kind of important book, Time, Space, Architecture, the stick. Right. Pevsner, also important historian. And Wittkower was one of the ones who studied with or had influence from those two. Actually, he had Boflin as a professor, but he was not very convinced. He thought he was too old and too dismissed, and he went to another teacher, right? Wittkower wrote a lot of essays, quite a few books, but the architectural principles in the Age of Humanism, see how everybody looks for fundamentals, principles, trying to understand why things are as they are. And this book has been following me since I was a freshman, first-year student, right? It is a book out of print. Actually, I was able to work only small copies. It was not translated to Spanish, and at that time I couldn't speak English, not even read. And I got a used copy. This was I got in probably 2009, 12 years ago, right? It's quite. This book tries to understand the Renaissance architecture, basically Alberti and Palladio. There's this kind of a set of monographs. And this is the guy, well, each chapter is about 30, 40 pages. He has a chapter on Alberti, one in Palladio, and then about 1/3 of the book is on the theory of proportion. How proportions in architecture were part of the aesthetics, and how Palladio started with it, and how it was changing of meaning and application in generations until it became kind of a old, kind of not really a useful tool, but some kind of old-fashioned belief that what is harmony in sound could be applied visually, just to demystify that. And not surprisingly, Wittkower was professor of Colin Rowe, for example. Right? So people are very linked. Wittkower is German, but he was teaching a long time in the United States, right? And that links the German, not only time, but the historiography with the American historians. There is another set of course, that period was very active. British, this probably not so important. Geoffrey Scott is purely British historian, totally. And this book is, again, the architecture of humanism, right? But subtitled Study in the History of Taste. This is 1914, again, I think. He has not any connection with the others, but surely he read all the books. It's interesting to want to have another vision. He speaks of all the essays or the tries to make a modern architecture as fallacies. He speaks of the functional fallacy or mechanical fallacy about Sullivan. The form follows function. The romantic fallacy of those kind of heroic architecture. The ethical fallacy, biological fallacy. So he tried, in that very British cynism, trying to find all the leaks in every kind of trend, right? And then, well, that's interesting. But this book is like a really, like all the predecessors and the followers, set a big foundation. It has been reference, and I reread it again. It's so good. But okay, you have to read it. It's quite dense and explains many things, right? I didn't post it yet, but I scanned just a chapter on Alberti, which is the less famous, one of the first ones. Let me, oh, it is here. So you have the full index, table contents. So really almost half the book, 1/3 is about proportions with appendix and so on. It's quite well explained. You might disagree, but he gives the reasons for those, right? What I reproduce is the full chapter on Alberti. Here's another interesting chapter on typology of churches in the Renaissance. One thing which makes interesting those guys is that really they were trying to understand by analyzing the buildings, right? Drawing diagrams on how they are composed. So they work on the composition, the proportions, trying to follow the mind of the project, right? How things were conceived and produced. And you have the full chapter on Alberti, right? From the theory of the column. Remember when we saw the extensions of Venturi in National Gallery, how the column was very symbolic element that was very unique there. That comes from this obsession of Alberti with the column, right? It's not only about that, but so you have a few diagrams explaining why things are like that, a lot of text, and then diagrams of the facades on how typology, proportions, kind of try to make a new architecture based on the wisdom of classical architecture. The following is Palladio, right? And then I reproduced also the images which refer to Alberti. That chapter is about 30 pages. It's not a long reading. You don't need to read it now, but actually the whole book, if you want to understand a little bit more the Renaissance, is one of the classical books. I think it's 1940 somewhat, just after the war. It's a bit more modern. Anyhow, a good book, and I will share this in the team drive so you can read it anytime. But the book is not easy to find, but surely you might find in the library. It's too important to be ignored. The other, if you have time, you are curious, I read this already in graduate school. It was some student from Berkeley who said, oh, this book has been out of print for 100 years, and now we can have, it was not 100 years, it was less than that. Now we can have the new reprint, so we involved both, and then I read it, and it was interesting. But let's stop here. So the second thing is just the talk. I didn't want to reuse the lectures because they were very long. Actually, we are already a bit long. But I think both in group should keep looking at examples, but you individually should be always reviewing your case studies and other examples we saw in class and many more. Not as the assignment of case study, but to find cues for what you are doing, right? So we always learn from the references. There is one interesting case study we will see now, but the format, I thought I explained on Tuesday, but I will say it again. Till third quarter term, those 2 weeks or so, I will try to have a format to have a small talk, some kind of example in class, and then work on your project on that given subject during the 4 remaining hours, only on that subject based on the examples or other examples you have good quality, not those you find fast in Archipelli or Arkibun or whatever, right? So it will be difficult for everybody to work here in class. So if you have the space in the drafting room, you can work there. And then in that time, I will have like individual time with each of one, which cannot be so long because we're too many, but maybe 10, 15 minutes with each is enough. And then at the end of the period, we pin up and we just see what we achieved during the class time. Trying to make it a bit more practical because I feel a little bit worried with so many people stuck already for 3 weeks. Right? The class is mostly paralyzed, right? So let's try have to class to have something more dynamic and more useful. Let me go to the what is it? So there is a very unique case of an extension by Mies Van Der Rohe. Mies Van Der Rohe made almost all the buildings unique and exempt or full towns, but he did only 2 museums, and one of those was an extension. And curiously, it is almost not published. It's quite hard to find. And it's the Houston Museum of Art. I spent a few hours looking for references, so this is a little bit disarranged. But let me try to share this. Okay, not surprisingly, Mies Van Der Rohe, but to have this recorded, I have to share the proper screen. Yeah, it's there. Let me try to make full screen and have the index of photos. So we can start from the model. So the Museum of Art of Houston is started in the 1920s. So it is not very far away from our building, which is 1930s, same period. It's a neoclassic building. This is for the model. This is not broken, but they are showing the bits of the building. It opens to a main garden, and there's like 2 of the avenues of Houston, right? It's all full of cars. The building had a project to expand with an inner courtyard, but for some reason it was not finished. So 1950 somewhat, the board of the museum wanted to have famous, renowned architect to do this, and the choice was Mies Van Der Rohe. Mies Van Der Rohe from Chicago went to Houston and said, "You wanted to make a courtyard here? It's so hot. No way." So he proposed to have 1 volume, also symmetrical and classical, just completing the old diagram, but totally solid, right? Which was interesting. This museum originally had like 2 floors. So the wings were 2 floors, with the top floor with top light and the lower floors with the light from the windows. But during the war, after the war in the 40s, with the development of artificial light and more sophisticated interior environment, they ended making blocking the windows and using only artificial light. The museum was small, the city was getting rich, so they needed more space. And Mies thought, okay, instead of making a courtyard, let's make a building with much height. So he put like almost 10 meters of height inside, like a huge hall open to the back garden. So it was a back garden, very much the Mies Van Der Rohe system, right? They sit in a garden. So he had like a front garden, back garden. It's like a monumental entrance, like having the modern and the old, but following that kind of a original composition. Right? Very unique because we have almost no examples of Mies Van Der Rohe doing curvilinear buildings. It follows a little bit the system for crown hall, like big beams supporting a big span. And this was really popular space because it was big. They could make events, large art. So it was like really the lost courtyard. People said once you cross the door of the extension, you would go like to an exterior space, but it was inside, which was probably something that made Mies happy. By the way, this building is not symmetrical. These 2 bodies are different because that building had also its own problems. Then 1969, they needed a further extension. 1969 was the year Mies Van Der Rohe died. He was already working in some other project in the National Gallery of Berlin. So he just added one more layer with another entrance and a small limestone wall, which would be the same material as the other building, creating a courtyard, right, which would give some kind of softening of the building to the exterior. So finally, we have the courtyard, we have the formal connection, we have the smallest scale, and the lateral accesses through the slit. So you see this small gesture of having a small angle, right, to have a kind of interlocking elements. The extension to have a further exit and this small courtyard, creating an in-between space from the street to the building, are very simple but quite effective tricks. And then this extension has two floors. One functional with entrance, the exhibition area, which is not as big as the original, and then a big atrium. So the original space is like a big atrium and then the old building. So still is quite consistent and quite well organized. So let's go back to the. So this is the satellite view. We have a original building, the two extensions overlapped, so they are felt like one. You see the streets. So this garden was quite important, but you know, Houston is like a super American city, and streets of Houston, almost any American city streets are very sad streets for cars. It's a drawback. And one problem with the second extension is that the space next to the mission became very slim. On the back, there is open air sculpture garden by Isamu Noguchi. Across the street is one large extension by Rafael Moneo, which is like almost the same volume. And then diagonal is the extension. Here's still under construction. It was finished last year, I think, by Stephen Holl. So in both cases, they had a big dilemma because Moneo had to make an extension next to Mies Van Der Rohe. Nobody's comfortable with that, right? And Stephen Holl had to face both Moneo and Mies Van Der Rohe. So they had all a hard time doing it. But all of them are quite good architecture, you can guess. So let's see a little bit, not much in detail, but some interesting things of those projects, as I could find them. This is the detail of the extension. So these are very subtle gestures at the axis, right? The courtyard we cannot see, it's around there. So it's some kind of small complexity happening in the join point. This is what we comment. The point where new meets old is always very critical, and it's worth to spend some effort there to have some kind of dialogue. The rest is completely filled, right? So I cannot say how it is done in detail because I was never here. I know only from the photos. So let's see a few photos from this is from the Google Earth. This is the main entrance of the Classical Museum. You see all windows are blocked. It was not originally so. This is the side. And this is the connection with the Mies Van Der Rohe Museum. You see this small wall, this larger wall within a courtyard, this access, the glass building with a small cantilever over the limestone. There is some kind of articulation to create some kind of invitation to enter there without much complication, but quite delicately done. This is the front, right? So this wall, which suddenly becomes negative, the first extension, which is clearly linked to the new extension, but we can see the difference there. And then a side entrance, right? And then the stone in both sides. This is the other side. There is a church on the bottom, so you have some kind of perspective. This is the weak point. So the platform is quite wide, and this kind of small piloty area, so you have some shade. This area is north, so it makes sense to have all glass. It's not very aggressive. So in that case, the orientation was quite fortunate. Not sure about the west side. Probably this is why they have so many trees on the west side and plenty of curtains. So again, this kind of a wall of limestone, which is carved, becomes a positive volume on the sides. This is clear reference to Crown Hall and a very clear symmetrical entrance in the middle, in a kind of sad street. Okay, you can see already Stephen Hall finished on the left, which is a glass in a kind of transparent curved panels. This is the entrance, like a really symmetrical, monumental. Doors quite small. This is kind of a mix between a domestic and monumental, and a quite simple but quite effective facade partition. You have the biggest scale with the long spans, then the mullions, and then almost a human scale where one person would be like this, right, of one of the partitions. So like a 3 layers of a scale put there. There's not much complication, but there's not oversimplification either. I guess also in 1969, still the glass industry was more comfortable doing this size of glass than the larger glasses we have now. And the building is circular, so you have to divide us in small bits. Curiously, the building looks quite small, so it's not so monumental. It's quite gentle in scale. Well, the lettering is quite cool, quite elegant. And this is the interior space. This is the extension of the museum. The entrance is in the lower floor. You have, okay, the lobby below, and the stairs connect the new extension with the old extension. And you have like a double space, which is also very exceptional in Mies Van Der Rohe. It's having this kind of opening there. This is the first extension, the one in the center. Mies Van Der Rohe speaking with, I think, the museum director. And this was the point of Mies Van Der Rohe, right? The extension is like the courtyard they never had, but made a building. This is a huge space with a big opening to the north garden. Only with that, probably was better than now, but they needed more extension, right? So this was quite successful, and Mies Van Der Rohe looked like not so dissatisfied. So for Mies Van Der Rohe, this is a happy face, I guess. So this space became very popular, and it was like the peak of the time in which those things were fashionable. And this is the vision. This worked very well because it's the same composition. It was more simple. It's one simple space to a large garden. It was almost perfect, right? The second extension is well done, but still it's interesting as how the same architect, who never makes extensions, did like a 3 original, first and second. And this became like the space in between the new and the old extension. This is the extension just finished. The top floor is totally empty. We have only those 2 cores. I think it's just 2 structural members to rigidize. And you see here the stair with the overall space linking to the old courtyard. Everything very simple, enough, you don't need more. And for your museum is perfect because then you have the free floor to make any kind of exhibition you want, or you need. Here's a photo of that connection space between new and old, and one of the exhibitions, right? Or photo is here. He was really happy, even smiling. And this is the diagram of how those things happened. And this is the floor plans. I didn't find, actually it's very hard to find any floor plan of this. Basement with a auditorium. By the size, this is quite a large building, right? So again, this transition element and one circulation, which is the space between both elements. In this case, we have the entrance, which has this layer in between with the stairs, and then the large atrium. If you go to the upper floor, this is what you saw in the photos before, very open extension space with a view to the open atrium, which is the floor below, right? Then the other building. So in this case, from the exterior, which exterior is not great, it's just the walkway. We have white entrance, a narrow with a low ceiling, then a transmission element with the stairs, and then connection spaces which bring to the, I think, administration and library with their own courtyards. So it's kind of, on one side, I have in the view to the courtyard, and then going up to the main exhibition space, and from here you will continue to the other exhibition rooms. So the link is very natural. So in this case, this is what we're trying to do today. If we see the movement space, we have a large monumental entrance, right? With in-between space, which has the stairs to go to the upper part. And in between, we have a lateral entrances. And see how each side is slightly different. Right? With the small lobbies, the stairs, and then one big courtyard. And here you have, of course, exhibition rooms from the old building and functional spaces, offices, and the library, each one with their own courtyard. Courtyard, green, right? So the movement space has this kind of expansion. Red. Okay. Come on. Okay. So. Okay. Right. So first layer, second layer, courtyard, wings, and then secondary circulations or connection to the circulation of the main building, which is going through the rooms or through corridors. Right. So it's quite a simple diagram. And quite clear, I would say. This is a larger plan with more detail. We have done it here. Let me stop sharing to erase the pencil. Then you can go to the details, right? You see how you have those transitional elements. Even though the entrance is very clear, you have like a widening around in a set of layers. You have those in-between spaces which create kind of slowdown, right? And in most spaces, you will enter through the sides, right? You have a filter, enter through the sides and you have another filter. You enter through the side and you have another filter, right? Almost nothing is straight. You always go from one side. So the monumentality is reserved only to the main entrance. There's a balance in those things. Then see the proportion of the spaces. The lobby space is quite large compared to the two wings, but only 30%, 1/3, right? This is exhibition space, so there's not really movement. And in the rest of the building, if we remove the lobby, the communication space is quite clear, right? You have the corridors, you have the lobby, you have the stair. Probably this is like a 20% of the area. The elements are wide. The extension is wider because the building becomes like a 3 times or 4 times as big. But there's some kind of proportion there, right? So it's something we have to see also. Mies, the same as the previous architects, were very, very clear, very clever with the proportions of elements. Same with those openings on the sides, right? They have the right size. They're not monumental, but they are clearly public in character, wide enough to know we are entering a public building, not just a service gate. So you have like the sequence, the scale, the proportion, but also the composition, right? How the circulation goes from central to, let's say, like a tangential. And you have many in-between spaces. You will never enter straight to the toilets from the main building, right? You will have like an in-between space and you will go hidden. Actually, I'm not sure where the toilets are. I saw it before, but probably some of the spaces there, right? Let's erase this. This is apparently Mies Van Der Rohe sketch. This is from the MoMA, New York Museum of Art, for the second extension. And this is, okay, small photos of the lobby again. This is the construction of the first part. This was clearly a rear side of the building. I don't know what happened to those facades. Probably they are hidden. I don't know. I couldn't find the photos. Let's go to Houston someday to see it. And this is the connection of the first and second extension. And of course, Mies Van Der Rohe was very aware this is a public building. Those curtains are really luxurious curtains. It's like silk, very high quality elements, not the cheap plastic curtains we have around. But okay, this is different. Okay, so this is the first part. Let me see if I missed something. Well, this was repeated. Yeah, we saw. So this is a better photo. Right. I think we saw all of them. Okay. So I couldn't find a section of this building. We have to figure it. Let's find again. So let's go to Moneo. Not this one. Moneo was more, and the Holl were more difficult to find because it's modern architecture, and because they have the copyrights and so on. In their website, they show very little. You have to buy the magazine, and I don't want to buy like 3 or 4 magazines to show this. And I will not go this to the first. I will just see a fast view. So Moneo, who is, I have to share screen. This one. So Moneo is a clever guy. He had completed several other missions. He was working on the Prado extension and so on. And he said, okay, then in Houston, this Mies Van Der Rohe, which make like a first built courtyard, like a courtyard inside out or outside in, then a very transparent extension, very light, very human. He went just the opposite, very solid, very compact, like to work by contrast. So it's like a really solid block. And to lighten a little bit, to make it lighter, not more brilliant, the building, he worked with those kind of top lights, which is something that still Holl did even much more radical, because the whole building becomes like a lit, right? So this is the side which is front Mies Van Der Rohe. This is the north side. It's just a box of the same limestone. But see again, that breaking the corners, this kind of hinge we see often with Moneo. And it's the only point in which the building has a small carving. It's the only place which is porous, which is connects to the pilotis of Mies Van Der Rohe on the other side. So even though this is not a place for pedestrians, the connection of all buildings are underground. Don't ask people of Houston to walk the street. They need to have the taxi to go to the building across the street, right? But okay, Europeans a little bit more careful of the street. So the complexity happens in this small space where you have side entrances. The rest is a bit more formal in some way. Okay, let me see the full collection because we cannot see everything. Of course, this is just for publication. Nobody goes to the roof. But Moneo tried to recover this top light of the original building because it goes very well in museums. And now artificial light only is very interesting in the 1950s, 1960s technology. Now we consider natural light is better. This has a big connection with the Art Museum of Stockholm. It's always a bit more organic, a bit more pleasant in terms of architecture. And this is the building. So it's like almost like a monumental Roman building, like a thick building. So his idea was to create, they needed a lot of exhibition space. So to make like a really, by contrast, very solid, very hermetic building, but with a lot of top light, which Mies Van Der Rohe was also horizontal, that's on the top. And large exhibition spaces on the top and smaller spaces, functional spaces in the lower part. That's the basis, and very compact. So you can see some bigger elements, which are the connection spaces, and then you can almost guess the exhibition rooms, which are quite well organized, quite rhythmical. So it's a totally different approach. You see the hinge, like having an entrance always tangential to the street, because the main is on the north side. But this kind of assume the movement of the street, not going straight from the other building, but on the sides, having this kind of screen in between. And this void, again, meaning a little bit the hinge and articulating a little bit one volume, which is very big. This is the only gesture in the whole box. It's quite interesting because this creates a quite large lobby space or porch space for the access, right? Where people can stay in the shade while meeting or waiting or something. This kind of public space, which is very much lacking in American cities. You go from the car to the inside and you have air conditioned as soon as you can. So this is interesting thing. And then something we do often in our projects, the views. It has very few windows. This is a quotation of, I think, Marcel Breuer. Right? Has kind of also diagonal window in one big museum. Only in some of the rest of spaces, you can look to the outside, and they are very, very much studied windows. Right? They go to the sculpture garden or to Mies Van Der Rohe building, and this is what you can see from the exterior. The rest, you concentrate on the arts. This is interesting thing. Somebody made a comparison between Vincenzo Scamozzi was Palladio's student. Actually, many of the buildings of Palladio were finished by Scamozzi, Vincenzo Scamozzi. This is a factory. This is the plan of Moneo Museum. Actually, this is the ceilings, right? We're gonna find money. It's quite interesting, right? That means Moneo has very much classical formation. But it's like really making kind of Sudoku to fit in as many exhibition rooms, but still have it organized. Right? It's like Uri Yunjong's Voronoi, but with the squares, not with hexagons, right? Like fitting, it's kind of a, I don't know, some kind of a repetition, self-replication, some kind of organic thing, and it has some kind of Roman character, right? But one thing is interesting, the communication spaces, I think we have better plans in other places. The whole building goes around a huge lobby. And it's long in scale, it's very close to the entrance, right? Remember the main entrance was on the sides. And from here we have like secondary spaces, right? Which connect the museum rooms, so you can go from one to another. Then you have like a hinges and rested spaces where you have those views of the city, which are very sparse, right? So it's kind of a layering of three qualities of the spaces, right? So there's always like a in between space, long gallery with top light, linking other galleries, and then at points those hinges, right, in the corners, with some exception. In this case, we have a gallery. But well, we should see how this is planned. Right. Then the last layer is the service spaces. So this is like the spaces for only the workers of the museum. Right. Secondary elevators. This is the load elevator. Look how huge it is, with a big room to storage to classify. Secondary elevator, secondary stair. And curiously, they must be very studied because the service core is in the middle of the building. So they can access almost everywhere. And the main lobby is like on one side, right? This is quite interesting game of things. This opening here, I guess, is another big opening. It's kind of secondary lobby, which organizes very well the building. So if you see those lobbies, again, This could be like a 15% of the full area. The rest of just movement and exhibition become together. But they're not everything. You have like a rhythm of large, small rooms and strategic points in which you have a bit more relaxed areas. Finally, we have, what happens here? Stairs, right? In opposite corners. So the safety is quite well until you have like escape areas almost everywhere, apart from the main escalators in the main lobby. This is radically different from Mies Van Der Rohe. Mies Van Der Rohe was open plan, but it had also the closed plans, more functional areas in the lower part. This is much more compact. Here, the movement area is really reduced, but still it's not stuffy, right? And you have a sequence, like at least 2 or 3 layers of different spaces. And this one is variation. The problem with the museums is the spaces are very repetitive. So you have larger, smaller, but with the same kind of character, let's say. So we know we are always in the same building. This is the perspective. So you can see the brutal difference between Mies and Moneo, but this is the difference of scale. So Mies building is like a really gentle and really domestic. It's not so monumental. This is the big lobby. Very simple, double height, but just enough. And then you can see many things recommended in many architects. That happens also in Mies Van Der Rohe. The accesses or the entrances just in the corners, just the tangential movement, right? The stair, the escalator also going on one side. And then huge natural light. You're totally inside, you have no views but the museum, but you know the sky is there, so you have some kind of orientation. And this one is a space where you appear when you finish one run, so you always have the reference of where you are. You're not lost in a labyrinth. This is the view, the entrance. And this is some of the gallery spaces on the upper floors, right? So you have a room after room. This is like very classical museum space, which works very well. This is why many museums have this system. This is the Pilotis space, very large. Of course, it is accessible to cars. This is Houston, don't forget it. And this is the access which goes to the main lobby, right? So you have like a sequence to the street. And this is quite a large lobby, but all the complication happens here. The rest of the building is quite simple. This is the Google inside view. You can even have notice of the paintings. What is said. So you have this kind of wall in Mies and then one opening in Moneo. So you're always making like the opposites across the street. It would be nice this street becomes pedestrian, because you see there's not cars to fill it, so they don't need this. I hope they do it. It will be much more interesting, so people can walk from one to another. So side view from Mies. Well, one thing which Moneo does often is this kind of lettering as kind of a sculpture. Almost all his buildings have this kind of installation. Probably some sculpture is in charge of it. In view, the access from the street. Lobby again, night view. We saw this already. We had a bit more. So let's stop with sharing. Stop sharing. And now let me open this. So this is a publication I found with much effort. What is it? Here. Let's go back to Zoom and share now the PDF. Okay, so this is a publication which has a bit more information. So this is the top of that side square space we marked in red, I guess. And I will go to, well, we have the original building, the first and the second extension by Mies and Moneo's building. This is the Stockholm Museum. It's a bit more organic, a bit more adventurous, not so heavy. But we have this, here we have section, right? So let's have the section, because this is interesting. And I think this section goes very much with the plan. So you have the street level. Again, this is a design section. See that the construction is not shown because it's not the point here. But you have clear continuation of the street. So the ground level is really ground level. Then you have the big lobby. This is the secondary courtyard we saw right with the photo in the beginning. This is the main lobby with the big top light, the escalators and the stairs. And there's like accesses and secondary spaces in between. This is quite interesting in between mezzanine. And then you have the layer of the exhibition rooms, which actually are more or less the same height of the exhibition rooms of Mies Van Der Rohe. Only the building has more program and it's a bit more high. This is the mezzanine here, right? But the point here is to see the sequence of the spaces from the entrance. Let's make only the negative. It would be nice to have the access there, right? But we have access, courtyard, corridor, lobby with light from one side. Right. So this creates a sequence of big, small, narrow, high, low, and then street. And then exhibition rooms always open to the sky. Right? So like a set of individual spaces which are clear, distinct, but it has some kind of sequence, some kind of logic in their arrangement. Right? This is a nice section, totally different from Mies, but also possible, which could work in many of your projects, because some of you are looking for compactness and you have many spaces. More than multiplying corridors, you can find a way to really make the rooms as compact as possible to have a very solid building without much space. Of course, this works well in a museum. In other programs, you have to be a bit more careful on how you move around. So this is the guy, but this is very old photo. And this is the articles. Okay. Let's stop this one, and then we go to the last one, which is we say Stephen Holl. Yes.
These three different objects form the museum complex.
Right.
So they're connected.
Yes. So this is this image here.
So
it will not be. So this is Moneo, Mies Van Der Rohe, Stephen Holl, and Noguchi's sculpture garden. Actually, the sculpture garden here, this is probably art school. They are all linked. Don't ask people of Houston to go to the street. It's like street, right? And actually, I will try to share the images so you can see the underground spaces are quite well studied. How do you enter from the underground to each of the buildings? Probably the most difficult is Mies Van Der Rohe, it was not planned for that kind of connection. But both Moneo and Stephen Holl were very careful on how you enter the buildings. Let's close Opera because I don't want to do this. I wanted to go here to open Stephen Holl. We don't have so many images here. Actually, it was published in the Detail magazine last year, I think. And I was thinking of putting one for the example for materials or building system exam, but it was a bit complicated, so I decided not to. But we have the details of this building. They are published, which is quite interesting. I wish we had the details of Mies Van Der Rohe of this building. So this is Stephen Holl. Again, Stephen Holl had a difficult time to work with those two very different buildings. So he chose a third way, which is the glass building, but not transparent, which is very much a Stephen Holl style, right? Very abstract mass. And Stephen Holl is very much this kind of illustrator of this project. So he has interesting sketches. The idea is basically that kind of roof, a kind of clouds, luminous canopies. Another way to bring top lights. So Moneo had a very classical top lights. Stephen Holl was a bit more organic in that sense. And you see the building just in between. He inherits this kind of courtyards of Mies Van Der Rohe, this kind of between buildings, but is also close to that compactness of Moneo, right? It has its own way of doing it. So it's interesting as an idea. Then the building itself is quite clear, as it happens with the Stephen Holl. Second museum. Here, he also, as Moneo does, and as Mies Van Der Rohe does, he creates inner courtyard lobby, right, which is triangular, curiously, because the site is triangular. And then it has like openings which go all to the exterior. This is those cuts. So it's kind of a courtyard with the arms, of which two are a bit more functional, right? But others are like real exits. Again, the building is very clear and the hierarchy is very clear. And this allows to have a set of exhibition rooms or exhibition spaces, right? Which in some cases are a bit ambiguous. So this is one or this is two, we don't know, right? This is clearly one, get in the corner. When you work with the irregular shapes, see how this element is smaller, but it's more or less the same area as other elements. And the shape is unusually open, so you let voids and some space in the corners. You never have this kind of a triangle ending in a acute peak, or this shape being totally closed, right? Things are a bit more organic. So take note of those kind of tricks to solve difficult points. Same as here. So as we saw with Moneo, you walk through the rooms. Right? So you have exits, you have movements, you have some choice to move around, but see how you always enter tangentially, right? Right. Tangential access to the spaces is quite interesting trick, because that makes very smooth movement. The only which is straight is this one, which is crossing the facade, but it becomes again tangential when you go inside. Right? As you come, it's kind of monumental, you go from the center, but then suddenly you are in the side of the courtyard, the atrium. Let's make this a bit smaller. Put it here. Smaller. So in this case, the space is a bit more complex than both Mies Van Der Rohe and Moneo, but it is very clear, very easy to follow. The complication happens here, so you have kind of a widening, narrowing, and then entering into the big part. Right? But even though this is quite complicated, because we have like branches, there's only the main and then the branches. There's not more movement around, so there's never a labyrinth. The only difficult point is in this area, right? Which you see a lot of complication, probably the administration, the more functional areas are there. But the rest is quite well proportioned. In this case, movement maybe 50%, right? Also, if we consider you go to the exterior, maybe it's not so much in the end. See the position, for example, of the elevators, because you have plenty of space in front of them, right? You don't block the space moving around. The position of the stairs, which also have exits not against the corridor, but on a wider space, right? So the movement is quite natural and easy to follow. And I think the toilets are quite far away, very well hidden in some place. We can see the toilets of Moneo. Okay, probably they're in the map, if you can follow them. Let's go to the other drawings. This is a section. This section, curiously, being the building so complex, is much more simple than Moneo's. You have like connected ground floor. Of course, at some point you have rooms, but we know we can enter, go to the exhibition room and go to the other side if we move, and the big lobby, right? We can see the lobby complete with the lights coming from the top. And those tops are very subtle, actually, they're not so exaggerated. So in this case, the movement space is just one soft entrance from the street with one big lobby very much in the middle of the building. radically different approach from Mies Van Der Rohe and Moneo, but still working quite well. And that's it. I didn't choose much more. We could have more, but you see the point. We didn't see this. Right? This is because I was not in order. Well, those sketches, we don't know if they were done before or after the project was finished. And then the facade. Again, remember that Mies Van Der Rohe worked with this kind of a tall and low walls. This is the connection, I think, with the Isamu Noguchi garden. So I'm not sure this is still in Holl, but this is already Isamu Noguchi sculptures. I think a soft connection with the building. We have this solid and openings, have some kind of small dialogue. And then the building being kind of sculptural, but again, having very clear composition. There's only one element with a subtle division by floors. Right? This is prefabricated layer. The courtyards are more simple because they really cutting into the existing surface. This is the lobby. Again, see how nice are the stairs when you have plenty of space around. You can move softly and really, this is like enjoying the space. As you move, you have something to look about. You're not in a hurry to reach the end of that stair. And see the angle is very soft. Right? Probably it's like a 20 degrees, like really, really soft steps. It's almost between stair and ramp. The same we saw with the Asplund in Göteborg, in which the stair was really, really soft. And these are the exhibition rooms in the top. So you have also the views are very, very nice. I didn't see any reference on what they're looking at, but on the ground floor is exit. In the top floor is like the rest of spaces where you have some kind of a relaxed, faraway view, and then you go to the next exhibition room, right? With the atrium and those top lights, which work quite well. This is the exterior. If you want, we see the details of construction when we make our own details. So this is a nice building, and this is the city view. I don't know if you have a night photo. This is from Google View, I think. No, I don't have it. But this is the lower floor. So you look the space for the trucks downloading, the big elevators, something you need always in museums. And access, I was not telling you the truth, so this is from the center of the building. So you enter to the center of the courtyard there. This probably has sort of different layers. And this is the whole campus. So you have Mies, Moneo, Stephen Holl, Isamu Noguchi. And I'm not sure this one. This is the School of Art, which is next to it. So it's a huge campus of arts, which started from this tiny building. Right? Hard to believe they could cop so long with only this when they needed so much. This is mostly private collections, which are donated and need a building to hold them. I didn't look for information in the garden, but this would be also a good example as landscape. But it's very much a park, sculpture park. But those working in kind of dispersion more park than a square would also look at it. Isamu Noguchi is a good reference. And if you have the memory of what we saw, those streets of 6 lanes are kind of painful in this area. Right? At least those 2 streets pedestrian would be like a really nice achievement. And probably the city works perfectly without them. But don't dare to tell in Houston streets are pedestrian because they have to go by car everywhere. So that's what I wanted to show you today. Both extension and the relation with the buildings, but how circulation is one space you can design on itself. It's not just the remaining between the rooms you put in the building. So today, I thought you were alive today. Okay. Okay. So today, just try to design that space. Plan and section, okay, so not with Mies, but with Mies you can guess, or you can try to draw the section within this exercise. Work on what you think is the most important floor plan, not every floor plan. And design just the circulation, the access, the lobby, the movement, to try to give it some kind of consistency, some kind of proportion, some kind of interest as in those three projects we saw, right? Plan and section. And don't worry if you have to go to larger scale at some point. Just try to have some kind of solution with it. And don't worry, you have to cannibalize some of the spaces we can adjust later. It's kind of looking at other way. I see that mostly we do the opposite, like making rooms and then trying to make corridors to make things. Right? So try to design just a moving space. Okay. So it is 3:20. We are like 20 minutes over the hour. Let's meet back at maybe 3 hours are enough, like 6:20 after 3 hours. So you go for 3 hours and I will be scolding one by one during 3 hours. So 3 hours, how many minutes? 180 minutes. 180 divided by 14. Mental calculation. Okay, so it will be 10 minutes per person plus a small margin. Okay, 10 minutes of scolding, and whoever wants to work here, or go to the room. Okay, and I will walk around so you don't need to collect everything.
Okay.